Hare Krishna. Good evening to all of you. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
So, on behalf of Institute for Science and Spirituality, I welcome all of you to this today's session by Mr. Vinay Kumar, interpreting rules of ethical reasoning from Bhagavad Gita. Mr. Vinay Kumar actually holds a master's degree in technology and is currently serving Government of India in the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, Ministry of Science and Technology as Scientist F. He contributes to the recognition scheme for scientific and industrial research organizations, SIROS, bringing together voluntary organizations to promote their activities in the areas of scientific and industrial research, design and development of indigenous technology. He has also contributed to technology development and demonstration program of the departmental for several projects. He has also served as scientist in other Government of India organizations like ISRO, where he has been a part of development space missions like ASLV-D4, PSLV-D2, and so on, and CSMRS, Ministry of Jal Shakti, leading many prestigious projects. He is a practitioner of Krishna consciousness in the Vaishnava tradition of Brahm Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya and is associated with ISKCON. So he is having so much experience and expertise to share with us. We are very fortunate. And once again, we also welcome Mr. Vinay Kumar. So, sir, we can start, I think. So, over to you.
So, thank you very much, Prabhuji.
Thank you, sir.
Indeed, an opportunity for me given by ISS to talk to the August gathering. I don't have an expertise on the subject, but as a Krishna consciousness person, we are always looking some literature, whatever is happening in the different subject areas. Of course, we do as our professional duty, we carry out scientific duties for promoting the science and technology. But following the Krishna consciousness, we look at the different aspects of the philosophy. And when the ISIS asked me to present some topic, so I chose this one because I was reading for some time. I was reading the different Western philosophy aspects. So I confess that I am not an expert. I have tried to gather the material and try to put it in a form which I understood, so that I can impart to the fellow members. So with that introduction to the subject, now I will just put on my slide. So I will share the slide. How to go to the? Okay. So the topic I have taken is interpreting ethical reasoning from Bhagavad Gita, the rules of ethical reasoning. So, just a moment. Okay. Right, it's okay. So the talk outline will be what is philosophy, and particularly the study of ethics and morals, and moral thinkers and philosophers from India and world. What are the different moral categories, and what are the ethical rules and approaches? When we talk about ethical rules, this is normally the Western philosophy approach we normally take, because there is no categorical ethical kind of categorization in Indian philosophy. And then once we take the ethical rules and approaches from the Western philosophy concept, we can just see that how we can relate it with Bhagavad Gita, and then I will come to the conclusion. So, as we know that ethics is considered as a philosophy, subject of philosophy, and the philosophy subject, broadly, it is divided in three verticals. One is called metaphysics, which in Sanskrit or Hindi it is called Tattva Gyan or Tattva Mimamsa. Then there is a branch of philosophy which is called epistemology, which can be said as a Gyan Shastra or Gyan Mimamsa or Praman Shastra. So metaphysics is talks about the subject. What is the tattva? What is the subject matter? So what is the ultimate subject matter? So under metaphysics, we study the metaphysics of soul, about the Atma, the soul, spirit, and then we study about the Ishwar, or the theology part of the metaphysics. Then there is the ontology, that what is the all, what is the power which is governing all this, the creation part, and then the cosmogony about the creation, and the cosmology, that how the creation has been made. The third vertical of the philosophy is axiology. That is what is called as Mulya Mimamsa or Mulya Shastra. So under axiology, we have got ethics, which comprises of meta-ethics, that is what is beyond ethics, the conceptual part of the ethics, and then what is the normative, what is the rule following, what is the mandandak. So what is the normative, what is the principle, what are the rules of the ethics, and then applied ethics. And the other part of the axiology is the aesthetics or the Saundarya Shastra or logic and Tark Shastra. So these are the different aspects. This division is as per the Western or the modern academic environment. This is how the philosophy is, subject of the philosophy is studied. Then the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy defines that the philosophy is a department of knowledge that deals with ultimate reality or with the most general causes and the principle of things. So different philosophies considers the different reality. What is the ultimate reality? So different philosophical thoughts take the different aspects of the ultimate reality. And the word philosophy comes from the word philos, which means love, and Sophia means wisdom. So philosophy in Western world is something, the love of wisdom. But if we see the Indian counterpart, we say it is darshan shastra, darshan. So what is seen? So in this case, now, if we see the darshan shastra, so in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that advidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya ubadekshanti te jnanam jnanina tattva darshina. So the Indian philosophical system talks about that it is the knowledge, the ultimate subject matter, ultimate tattva is something which has to come in a disciplic succession. So what Krishna says that just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. The self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. So seen the truth. So the philosophy in the Indian tradition is something which we say that it is seen, it is experienced, and it is seen. So it is an exponential knowledge, and it is a seen knowledge. So defining the tattva jnana, or what is the ultimate subject matter. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said that vadanti tattvavidam tattvam yad jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdate. So learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance as Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. So the absolute truth is both a subject and object. So what Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, that Vedeshu sarveshu ahameva vedya. So all the knowledge, the knowledge, the epistemological method that which comes from the ultimate is applied to know the ultimate. So he is the subject as well as the object, and there is no qualitative difference. Therefore, the Brahma, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are qualitatively one and the same. So the scope of the philosophy, so the scope of philosophy cannot be put within a precise boundary, but within the widening horizon of wisdom, it can be seen. Nowadays, we can see that if you study the philosophy, so the philosophy of every different subject is studied. That is philosophy of sociology, philosophy of political science, philosophy of science, and philosophy of everything. So philosophy of philosophy also is understood. So the scope of philosophy embraces the whole of the reality. So anything, because it's always it's open that you can investigate any subject matter philosophically. So although the philosophy claims to consider everything in general and nothing in particular, we can still point out some of the areas that are generally accepted as typically philosophical. So philosophy as a subject, what we understand of different religious traditions, they typically come under the Dharma Shastra or theological part of the philosophy. So they are typically considered as philosophical studies, but philosophy of different subject, as a matter of fact, is also studied. Although the cosmos is subjected to a thorough analysis in the wake of the growth of science, the philosophy has not left it only to the science. Complementing the scientific knowledge of cosmos, philosophy took two looks at it in a radicality. So even the philosophy looks the philosophy very radically, critically, and there is a critical philosophy concept is there. And not only that, we have the philosophical radicals, where the philosophically minded people, group of people. So that was in the modern era, led by the Jeremy Bentham and James Mill. The political radicals from the 19th century, they inspired by these two philosophers. They rejected any philosophical or legal naturalism and furthered Jeremy Bentham unilateral utilitarian philosophy. So sometimes the philosophy also becomes radical and they don't accept the other philosophical traditions. So, I mean, that is a part of the, at the time now we can see that many of the theological religious traditions, they are objecting to many of the other philosophical traditions, the religious tradition. So as we discussed that within the philosophy, there are 5 primary branches. One is the epistemology, the metaphysics, and the ethics, and the logic and aesthetics. So that is what already we have discussed. So coming to the part of the ethics or the moral philosophy. So what is moral philosophy? It concerned with the nature of the right, what is right or what is wrong. So this is called as deontology. It is normative ethics, and the nature of the good. So what is good and how about the utility of the good. So theory of the goods are of 2 basic types. There are theistic class of people who assume that there is a God, and there are the philosophical or anthropological people who, on the basis of the utility part of the philosophy, they take the moral philosophy further. When we just a moment. When we study the philosophy of ethics, so one part of the moral philosophy is called virtue. So what are the good sadguna? What is the good things we have? So Aristotle defines there are 12 kind of virtues like courage, temperance, liberty, magnificence, magnanimity, ambition, like that. So, and justice. So one, if some acquires the sadguna or the virtues, so that is the kind of that leads the moral concept in that person. But the virtues, so the virtues, when it is in between, then it is useful. But the virtues in excess also becomes that becomes a defective, or that becomes a dosha. And when it is deficient also, that virtue, then also that becomes a dosha. So for example, bravery is good as a virtue, but when the bravery is in excess, it becomes rash, and then it is a vice. That is not a virtue, then it becomes vice. And similarly, the bravery, when it is lessened to an extent, then it becomes cowardly. So the deficiency of virtue becomes a vice again. So this is called virtue ethics. So in Bhagavad Gita chapter 16, the Krishna, that chapter itself divides a bit about the divine and demonic natures. So Asuri or Devi Prakriti. So in that, Krishna says that Abhayam Sattvam Shanshuddhi Jnanam Yoga Avasthiti Danam Damascha Yagyascha Swadhyaya Tapah Arjavam Ahimsa Satya Kama Krodha Tyaga Shantim Pashanam Daya Bhutesho Loluptam Mardamam Hir Chapalam Teja Chama Dhriti Shocham Droho Nati Manita Bhavanti Sampadam Devim Abhijatasya Bharata. So Krishna says that fearlessness, the purification of one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity, self-control, performance of sacrifice, study of Vedas, austerity, simplicity, non-violence, the truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault-finding, compassion for all living entities, freedom from covetousness, gentleness, modesty, steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, and freedom from envy and from the passion of honor. These transcendental qualities, O son of Bharata, belongs to good, godly man endowed with a divine nature. So the Krishna in these three shlokas talk about the virtues of a person. So that contributes to the moral nature. In the next verse, Krishna says that Dambho Dapo Abhimanascha Krodha Parusha Mevacha Ajnanam Cha Abhijatasya Partham Sampadam Asurim. So pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance, these qualities belong to those of the demonic nature, O son of Pritha. And he says that, so the Davi Sampadi Mokchaya Nibandhaya Asuri Mata Mam Shucha Sampadam Devim Abhijato Asi Pandava. So the transcendental qualities are conducive to liberation. So the virtues, whatever he described in the slokas from 1 to 3, that leads to the liberation, whereas the demonic qualities make the bondage. So that bond the people, that puts the person into the cycle of birth and death. So he says that don't worry, O son of Pandu, for you are born with a divine quality. So the virtue ethics or the virtues leads to the moksha or the ultimate, realizing the ultimate. So if we see the history of ethics, so it has, we can say that it has passed on to 3 stages. From the Western perspective, we see the first stage is that the moral authority was earlier was with the divine, and it shifted from the divine to the humans. And then the second stage, the extending the belief that the humans are responsible only to humans. So this came because of the rise of nihilism and relativism. So the nihilism is the belief that all values are baseless and that nothing can be known or communicated. So these are the different the philosophical concepts that arose in the medieval time. So under the nihilism, it is often associated with extreme pessimism and a radical skepticism that condemns the existence. A true nihilist would believe in nothing. So there are people that there is nothing after and before and nothing after. So that also is there in the Indian philosophical system like Chalak. So they say that there is nothing after the death. So that kind of philosophical concepts are also there. And they say that there is no purpose other than perhaps an impulse to destroy. And the relativism means that everything is relative and there is nothing absolute. So this kind of concept is there in the Western philosophical system also, and in the Indian philosophical system also, which is this kind of relativism is there. And this is a family of philosophical views which deny claims to objectivity within a particular domain and asserts that fact in that domain are relative to the perspective of an observer or the context in which they are assessed. So they say that there is nothing like absolute. But in Indian tradition, we have got an absolute sky, absolute word, where everything is absolute, there is no change. So there are both concepts. There is the absolute domain, there is a relative domain. So, so this is the second stage. Now, the third stage of history of ethics talks about the focusing the ethics shifting from the individual to the public ethics. So nowadays you can see people talk about the utilitarianism. That is, what is the utility of any philosophy? It should be useful for the majority of the people. And the ethics has now gone into the multiple diverse areas. That is the ethics into the science, ethics in publication, ethics in environment, and ethics in business. So everywhere ethics is increasingly getting popularity. And and the virtue ethics. So virtue ethics now, I think in Delhi government also, the schools, they have started happiness classes. So earlier there used to be Niti Vachan or Niti classes in a school. That is increasingly getting again. In between, there were some kind of political system. Political system also takes advantage of the what ethical values has to be taught to the society. So the ethical philosophers can be classified in one of the two ways. Those who believe in the moral facts exist, and there are the people who deny that moral facts do not exist. So they deny that if it is exist also, we can't know what is moral and to whom it is moral. So there is a argument against the absolute, and that is based on diversity. The philosophers, some of the philosophers say that because the moral standards differ so much among the cultures, morality derives from the local ethics, not from the innate moral absolute. So they claim that, see, it is nothing which is absolute moral. But if we study the Indian philosophical system, and especially the Vaishnava tradition, so we understand that there is an absolute domain is there, where everything is absolute. So, but most of the Western philosophical system, they don't understand the spiritual sky. So they hover at the mental platform, and most of the philosophical traditions that come in that tradition only. So, but the diversity can say nothing about what is right and wrong, only about what it is. So the diversity, because of diversity, we can say that what is happening is what can be known, and there is nothing like absolute ethical system. So diversity also does not rule out absolutes also, because if one system is working and one system is not working, therefore the other system can be right as well. An overall pattern or the morality is there, despite the differences in detail. Generally, stealing and murder, some of the things, no, they are always an adultery. They are considered as immoral. They are wrong, and but the penalties differ in different societies. So similarly, there is a concept of determinism in the philosophical tradition. This determinism is a theory that all events, including the moral choices, are completely determined by previously existing causes. So whatever moral system is evolving, whatever is existing, that determines what will be the moral system ahead. So determinism is usually understood to be preclude or that which close the free will. So it says that one does not have a free will. It is just because the previous system is existing. So the incremental ethical values will determine on basis of the existing one. So because it entails that humans cannot act otherwise than they do. So humans are socialized into accepting morals, ethical practices, which they must accept. So these are some of the concepts relating to determinism. So evolutionary ethics in the material universe is a product of nothing plus time plus chance, or if matter itself is eternal, there is no necessary value that universe or anything in it. So ethics becomes a matter of personal choice, plus culture, plus a point on the time spectrum. So right and wrong are defined by the majority and enforced by sanction. So that also again talks about the determinism theory. So definition of the morality in the terms of moral judgment, the moral reasoning, and moral institutions are there. So I will not just talk about much on that. So I just want to come to the point that what are the most of the ethical rules which are now applied even in the business ethics and many other ethics of the different subject matter. So ethics is the science of morality, and it discusses the contents of moral consciousness and various problems of moral consciousness. The moral consciousness is a consciousness of right or wrong. It involves three factors. One is called the cognitive or the intellectual, so in which the mind determines what is the ethical and what is not. The other is called as the affective or emotional. So where the emotional contact decide what is the ethical, and then see some of the other ethical concept is that it is driven by the connotative or the volitional. So what you desire to do. So what you desire as ethical, you want to do it. So I will not go to this because I feel that it's more on the different definition part of the moral. So the moral ideas, some of the major moral ideas by the major philosophers of the Western tradition. One is from the Plato and Aristotle is the justice. The justice and the Aristotle also, he talks about virtue, so virtue ethics. The Kant is a medieval period philosopher. He has worked extensively on the deontological or the rule system of ethicals. He has framed some of the major rules which are very much taught in the Western philosophical tradition. And then the consequentialist, that is the utilitarian concept by J.S. Stuart Mill, and some of the very recent philosophers in the morals are some of the philosophers like Held, whose concept is based on care. And then there are extreme philosophers who talks about the skepticism and relativism, and one of them is Nietzsche. He even gave the concept that there is a death of God, because he says that if he says that to express his ideas, he says that the enlightenment has eliminated the possibility of existence of God. So he says that more and more people are enlightened, so there is no need of God, and God will become extinct. So there are extreme philosophers, and they give their concepts. So moral categories, we can say that moral categories are divided in different categories, which is individual versus social. So whatever individual moral concepts that may vary when we apply to the social moral and the ethical values, and it is whether it is relative or whether it is absolute, and it is depending on motives, or which is looking at the consequence or the ultimate end result, and whether it is centered at the self, or whether it is altruism, that is for the common people, for the paramartha, or we can say that for larger community. So to understand the Western philosophical concept, so there are some of the concepts we must understand that. So one is called the idealism. So that was the concept by the Plato, and idealism is a metaphysical view that associates reality to ideas in the mind rather than to the material objects. It lays emphasis on the mental and spiritual components of the experience and renounces the notion of the material existence. So the idealism says that whatever is known to be known, that depends on the person who is trying to know. So the knowledge that depends, that rests as a form of idea. So that is not what we see the knowledge here. There is a knowledge which is existing as an idea in some other space. So that is close to some of our Indian traditions. So the other concept is the realism. The realism in philosophy is a viewpoint which accords to the things which are known as or perceived as existence or nature, which is independent of whether anyone is thinking about or perceiving them. So now what it says that whatever we have to understand, it is independent, and whether somebody understands it or not, it exists as it is. So Aristotle and many philosophical traditions, all the empiricists that say that whatever is existing is the knowledge, whether you understand it or not. So the deductive method of scientific investigation that follows this theory of realism. And one very good picture is there. So this is a picture of Plato and Aristotle. So Aristotle was the student of Plato. So Plato and Aristotle. So Plato is pointing his finger on the top that there is a ideal space where the knowledge exists, and whatever we see is nothing but that is what which descends from that ideal space. But the Aristotle says that the reality is here, and it has to be deductive, it has to be experienced, it has to be experimented. So this is a very famous picture, a wall picture from the Western tradition. And then in the medieval time, the empiricism or the experimental theory of the knowledge, that the origin of all knowledge is sense-based or sense experience. So all knowledge, if we acquire the knowledge through senses, and it emphasizes that the role of experience and evidence, especially the sensory perception in the formation of ideas, and argues that the only knowledge humans can have is a post priori, that is based on the experience. So that is most of the scientific knowledge progresses based on the empirical system. So we create some experience and then we realize that. So that is the concept. And in our tradition also, we were listening some talks. Up to an extent, one of our Professor Behra, he has been talking that this what we understand is the experience only. What we have is the experience. What we know is the experience only. So, but the experience also transcends. So there is a big topics and a lot of artificial intelligence and all activities are going on. That what are the experiences we can create? But there is a concept of a priori. So that will come as a further concept. So John Locke and George Berkeley and David Hume, these are the famous the philosophers in the tradition of empiricism. And but there is another school of thought which says that it is rational. So one has to be rational, and then it is a viewpoint that regards the reason as a chief source and test of knowledge, holding that reality itself has an inherently logical structure. The rationalist asserts that the class of truth exists that the intellect can grasp directly. So they said that with your intellect you have to grasp, and it is not that you have to experience and then only. So whether you experience it or not, the reality, the idea that rests already there. So the famous philosophers in these traditions are the René Descartes and Spinoza and Leibniz. So these are some of the philosophers of the Western tradition. So I will just name them. So the pre-Socrates era, because the Western philosophical tradition, so that starts with Socrates, and some of the pre-Socrates era, some philosophers are there. So they have contributed, and mainly it starts with Socrates, Plato, and then Aristotle, then Epicurus, and there has been a long gap. They call the period of antiquity to the period of Renaissance, the medieval time. And in the medieval time, they have philosophers. There are moral philosophers, that is Machiavelli, Thomas Aquinas, John Locke, Rousseau, and Immanuel Kant, that I will take some of the, the rules, whatever some of the rules I will discuss, because I'm not a subject expert on this, but I'm just trying to see that how the thinkers and philosophers have tried to come up with some normative ethical principles, and how it is inherently embedded in the Indian tradition. And so just a kind of comparative things I've tried to make. And Jeremy Bentham, who talks about the utilitarianism, and J.S. Mill also in that tradition. And then the teleological ethics, that is the end, what is the ultimate end? So end benefit to the public. So Max Weber is one of the moral philosophers. And the Virginia Potterhead is an American philosopher who has given a concept based on the care, and a living philosopher, Karl Hohmann, is a German philosopher who talks about the modern ethics and moral economics, whether the morality can be incentivized. In the Indian tradition, we say that the Indian philosophy itself, because we have got a philosophical tradition, Indian philosophical system that is called Khat Darshan. Different philosophical traditions are there. They have got embedded moral concepts within it. The epic like Ramayana and Mahabharata, that is full of the ethical values. And in the ancient time, the Kautilya, around at the period of Chandragupta Maurya, he was the prime minister, and he has given a lot of ethical rules. So Kautilya Niti Shastra. So the famous one is the Sama Dama Danda Veda. So, and in South, if you happen to visit the Kanyakumari, you can see a tall statue of Thiruvaluru. And so he is supposed to be one of the moral or ethical philosophers, and he has written extensively on the moral principle for the kings and the governance. And in between, the Indian philosophical system, they are not considered in the tradition of the morals, but if you see the Vaishnava tradition and even the Vedanta tradition of the Shankaracharya also, there are a lot of moral things, but they are more considered into the branch of the metaphysics and the epistemology. And in the modern times, Swami Vivekananda, Gandhiji, and Nehru, Mother Teresa, they all have contributed to the ethical concepts in the sociology or the politics in different aspects. But being the Krishna conscious follower, I feel that one of the most prominent moral philosopher has been His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Maharaj, and we are in his tradition. So we'll talk about that. I have got a video because I knew that I am not an expert on the subject, but some of the direct talks of the Srila Prabhupada I will try to share so that people can, on the context, they can enjoy it. As I was talking, that Indian school of philosophy that consists of the six Shaddarshans or six philosophical traditions. One is called the Sankhya philosophy, and the authority of the Sankhya philosophy is Kapila Muni. And there are, of course, two Sankhya philosophers, Kapila Muni real and Kapila Muni real 2. And that talks about the eliminating the physical and the mental pains and receive the liberation. So that talks about the Sankhya Darshan, or the analytical study of the metaphysics. The other tradition is called Yoga philosophy. The authority is Patanjali Rishi, and that is a practice of meditation and samadhi for renunciation. And the third is the Nyaya philosophy that is propounded by Gautam Rishi. So that the theme for that is the logical quest for God and phases of creation. And the fourth is the Vaisheshik philosophy, and the authority for that is the Kanad Rishi. So he talks about the science of logic, and the futility of Maya, that how Maya diminishes. And the Mimamsa philosophy, the early part of the Vedic literature, the authority for that is Jaimini. And the theme is that Vedas are eternal and divine. And the Untar Mimamsa part is the Vyasadeva. So that is called the Vedanta philosophy. And the authority is Vyasadeva or Badarana. And he explains the divine nature of soul, Maya, and creation. So that is a comprehensive philosophy. And we follow that Vedanta philosophy. Of course, within the Vedanta philosophy, there are different traditions. There are the traditions of Vaishnavism, and there is the Shankaracharya tradition is there. But now, for the comparative purposes, I have taken the philosophical concept of the ethical rules from the Immanuel Kant, who lived between 1724 to 1804. So he was a German philosopher, and he's considered as a central figure in the modern philosophy. And he, in fact, revolutionized, like the Copernicus, revolutionized the thinking that the universe model is the geocentric, not geocentric, it is a solar centric. So similarly, the Immanuel Kant is supposed to be the central figure, and because he gave the concept of the synthetic a priori, that the knowledge is derived not only from the empirical system and not only from the rational system, but he combined that the both systems of the empirical and rationalism system, they are both required to acquire the knowledge. And most of his concept is discussed as the critical philosophy. So critical philosophy is one of the major course in the philosophy. And his three main contributions are known as the critique, and the famous books written by Immanuel Kant are the Critiques of Pure Reasons, Critique of Practical Reason, and Critique of Power of Judgment. So that depends, and that talks mainly about the will, free will of the human. So that talks about the human autonomy. So what he argues is that the human understanding is the source of general laws of nature that structure all our experience, and the human reasons gives itself the moral laws, which is our basis for belief in God. So it is supposed that he was atheist in the beginning, but during the later part of his life, when he was writing his philosophical concepts of the morality, he became, at least he believed the God as an ontological concept, at least he believed God. Then he talks about the freedom and immortality. Therefore, he says that scientific knowledge, morality, and religious belief are mutually consistent and secure because they all rest on the same foundation of human autonomy, which is also the final end of the nature. So Immanuel Kant is one of the known figure for the moral reasoning. So I will just take his moral reasons, and we'll see that how all the concepts, whatever the Western philosopher people try to propound, how intricately that is all embedded in the Indian tradition. And I mean, anything you talk about, any concept you talk about, if you follow the Indian tradition, and especially the Vaishnava tradition, then everything is contained there. And I will try to just compare or interpret. It is not interpretation, it is just kind of debating the things on the concept of the Bhagavad Gita, whatever Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. I will take some of the rules of the ethical reasoning propounded by different Western philosophers. And then I will try to read some of these slokas so that the audience can be just sensitized to the subject, because I am also a student. I am not an expert. So it is just, please kindly excuse me because I am not an expert. I'm trying to I was reading something. I thought that let me sensitize the people. And this is how we have to open our horizon, because we follow certain traditions, we have certain beliefs. But no, if we just try to see that how everything contributes to the spiritual development. So what I was telling here, that according to the theological, that is what is the end use, the theological worldview, of reflecting the judgment that Kant introduces to unify the theoretical and practical part of his philosophical system. So he tried to combine both the concept of the rationalism and the So the concept by Immanuel Kant is called transcendental idealism. So because empiricist and the just a moment, the empiricist and the rationalist, both traditions he has combined. So then his concept is known as transcendental idealism, and this is also called as the formalistic idealism, he holds that the human self or the transcendental ego constructs the knowledge out of the sense impression and forms the universal concept called categories that is imposed upon by. So the person, he imposes on himself certain categories, and from that aspect, so everybody has his moral concepts, but for those concepts, he has given some rules that if you compare your ethical reasons on those rules, then only you can say that you are following some ethical rules. So one of the main concepts he talks is that the action, the ethical action one should follow is the goodwill. So goodwill means he wants somebody should do good for others. So there should be will to do good. So so goodwill is a basic concept, and the system of rules what you create for yourself for doing good. So somebody defines doing good to his own category. So whatever system you oppose upon you, he calls it as a maxim. So some of the rules he uses the term maxim, and he says that morality should be logical. There's a morality and there should be logic, and so the morality is inescapable as a logic. So something which we are doing should be logical, and the way it should be logical. The morality also is inescapable. I mean, you can't run away from the morality. And the will, for will, he says that will should be consistent. It is not that your will should be fluctuating, and there is a free will. So free will is much talked in the Indian tradition also, that every jiva is because he is every jiva is fulfilling his ambition or whatever the wish he has got. So to fulfill his wish, every jiva is acting. So now let us come to the Kant's rule of ethical reasoning. So Kant, he has given three major rules. The first rule is called as the categorical imperative. So the categorical imperative talks that one should act according to the maxim. Maxim means the rule. So one should act according to the rule, what he has imposed on him, that you can make a universal law. So something, if somebody is doing something, so whether it is ethical or not, so he can judge it from the concept that can this whatever rule he is framing, can it become a universal law that everybody can do that? So this is called as the categorical imperative. The practical imperative, he says that one should act in a way that you use humanity both in your person and in person of each other at any time, not just as a mean, but also as a purpose. So he says that so to do good, your end objective should be to do good. So the purpose, the ultimate, the laksha must be, so that is the practical. So ultimate ethical reason will be that the ultimate achievement will be to do good. And the third rule he devises is called the publicity rules. And he says that all actions related to the right of the people whose maxim is not compatible with publicity is wrong. So it means that if you are doing something good, whether it is good or not, it can be judged when you are asked to make it public. So like some drug companies, they are making some experimenting some drug, and they conceal with the people to whom they are experimenting, and they can say that this is, we are doing it for the good for the people, but whether they can, why they are hiding it with the people with whom they are experimenting. So anything can be judged as a good under the publicity rules if it can be disclosed to the public. So if it cannot be disclosed to the public, it is not ethical. So we just learned about the different ethical approaches. So one was the ethic of conviction, that is the will. So this is the Kant philosophy, and the criteria to judge the behavior is that one is creating good for the others. So that is called the ethics of conviction. And the other rule the Kant gave was the categorical imperative. So this is the other approach, and the criteria to judge the behavior on the categorical imperative is that does the general applicability create a good for others? So this is again the universalization of the ethical rules, and is it what one would want for themselves? So if you are doing it something and you say that I am doing good, then if somebody asks that if the same thing is done with you, is it okay? So that is one criteria how to judge whether it is ethical or not. And the practical imperative is talk about the positive effects on others. So this is under the rule again by the Kant, and the publicity rule as we discussed, and this is the reaction of those affected and the society. So this will be the rule for judging that behavior. And ethics of duties, this is called normative ethics or deontological. So one has to, so these are the concepts given by Kant. So obeying the rules and the corresponding norms. The ethics of responsibility is seeing the positive effects and on others. So I will take this judging behavior of the ethical valuation approaches, and I will just take some of the two slokas from Bhagavad Gita, and we'll see that how any judging behavior which has been characterized here, how it is intricately built into the, I mean, even if you take many slokas from Bhagavad Gita, these things are either accepted or refuted, and because that is a holistic solution. So the ultimately, what I want to conclude that if you are in the Indian tradition of philosophy, and if you are really following the Vaishnava tradition, then all the ethical approaches, they are intricately, inherently there. For that matter, I have already shown you the chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita that talks about the virtues, the virtues of the person, and what is good or what is bad. And the other thing is that utilitarianism, that is a positive net effect, positive net happiness, when happiness is balanced against the suffering. So this is more of a democratic situation. So what is good in the larger context? So utility part is also a criteria to judge the behavior, but it is again, I mean, that has all, I mean, all these rules, they have got a shortcomings, because so it has to be conditional. It cannot be, utility criteria cannot be applied, because what is good for the majority, then the minority will be suffering. So other concept of the moral economics, as I told, so this is a very recent concept of the criteria to judge the moral behavior. And it talks about whether the social moral rules are sufficient. Can it be incentivized? So does it pay to be act morally? So why the people will be moral or ethical? So why not the morality be incentivized? And the criteria of justice is an old concept by Aristotle, Plato. All they have talked about the criteria of justice. So these are the different valuation approaches, and these are the criteria for judging the ethical values. So I will just go to these rules one by one, and I will take some of the two shlokas, and I will just try to interlink that how the ethical rules are inherently inbuilt with the Vedic literature, especially the Bhagavad Gita. And so for that matter, if we see these Western traditions, we see that here the missing link is that most of the Western tradition, they don't have the complete aspect of the philosophical tradition, at least the metaphysical part. They lack much on the theological part, because most of the developmental philosophical traditions have come after the Plato. Plato, to a sense, is quite close to the, we can say, the Indian tradition, but the other traditions, especially Aristotle onwards, the Socrates was earlier, but Aristotle onwards, most of the things that deviates from the complete concept of the philosophical traditions, especially the theology part. So defining that, I would just like to introduce to the people that Bhagavad Gita has got 18 chapters, and Bhagavad Gita talks everything. So the first chapter, observing the armies of the battlefield of Kurukshetra, this itself talks about the ethical values. So the Arjuna, he himself is bewildered in the battlefield, and whatever reasons he cites to Krishna, that he will leave the battleground on the many moral and ethical reasons. But the Krishna starts deliberating Bhagavad Gita, imparting that Bhagavad Gita knowledge to Krishna, and refuting all his moral and ethical reasons, whatever he has given. The second chapter of Bhagavad Gita is a summary of the whole Bhagavad Gita, and that is basically talks about the soul, the real identity of the person, the soul. And then the third chapter talks about the Karma Yoga and how one should do his Karma Yoga. So while doing your karma, you are subjected to the fruits of your karma. So he talks about the what is favorable karma and what is unfavorable karma, and what is the karma which is not affecting your future course. So that is a transcendental karma. So talking further on that, he talks about the transcendental knowledge. And then he talks in the fifth chapter, he talks about the action in the Krishna consciousness, that how one can do the akarma or the transcendental karma while acting in Krishna consciousness. Then he talks about the Dhyana Yoga, that also relates to the, if you see the other philosophical traditions, so many of the traditions are also here. So if one targets to realize the Paramatman, so he talks about the Dhyana Yoga. Then he talks about the absolute, the knowledge about the absolute. Then he talks about the Bhagavad Prapti, or the attaining the supreme, how one can achieve the ultimate reality. And he gives the confidential knowledge. The chapter is the most confidential knowledge, that is the Param Guhya Gyan. Then after giving the Param Guhya Gyan, Krishna talks about the absolute opulence of the absolute, or he talks about his Aishwarya, see, opulence of he as a person, the absolute reality. And then he talks about then he describes, he shows his universal form, that is Virat Swarup. And then the next chapter, 12th chapter, is devotional service. Then he talks about the nature and who is the enjoyer, and what is the consciousness, that is Prakriti, Purush, and Chetana. So then he talks about the three modes of the material nature. So, this every underlying principle is explained in detail. So, if somebody goes through Bhagavad Gita, that is what we expect from the people here. That if you read Bhagavad Gita, all the ethical concepts or rules, they are inherently inbuilt, and you are at the highest or the transcendental ethical platform. So you don't have to worry about what rule you have to follow. So it will go on, one will go on graduating on every aspect, including the ethical. So the next chapter, Krishna talks about the yoga and the supreme person. And then he talks about the divine and demonic nature. That is what the virtues, what we are talking about. And then he says that these virtues are acquired, or the demonic nature are acquired because of the different kind of faith, because the nature has got three modes, and every living entity is subjected under the three modes. And depending on the level of his interaction with the three modes, the faith is developed, and every other aspect of his life is developed according to that the material three modes of material nature. And then in the end, in the last chapter, he concludes that what is the ultimate rule that one has to follow, and he talks about sarv dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraj aham tam sarva papebhyo mokshashyami ma shucha. So that was a prelude for the Bhagavad Gita. But since we are discussing about the virtues, that is much deliberated in the chapter 14. The three modes of material nature, because that virtues, they are governed by three modes of material nature. And Krishna in 14.5 says that Sattvam Rajah Tamah iti guna prakriti sambhava nibagdhanti mahabaho dehinam abhyam. That is, that material nature consists of three modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the internal living entity comes into contact with the nature, O mighty armed Arjun, he becomes conditioned by these modes. So we all living entities, they are subjected to the three modes of the nature, and the mode of goodness, sattvam, and the mode of passion, and the mode of ignorance. So at the level we interact with these three modes, so that is why we call that anybody has to have a gunatmak parivartan. That is, you have to elevate your mode. You have to slowly grow from the mode of ignorance to passion to goodness. Rather, now normally everybody, most of us, we are hovering in the mode of passion and ignorance. So one has to graduate to the mode of goodness, and from the mode of goodness, one has to transcend. So the transcendental knowledge, one chapter of Bhagavad Gita talks about the transcendental knowledge. So in chapter 3 Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that prakriti krimanani gunahi karmani sarvashah ahankara bhimuratma karta ahamiti mannate. So see, normally we living entity, we tend to be moral or immoral, whatever, but we must understand that we are under the influence of the prakriti or the nature, and the nature is acting through its three modes. So we have to elevate our modes. So until unless you elevate your mode and then try to graduate to the mode of goodness, you can't say that you can follow the absolute ethical principle. So it is, Krishna says that ahankara vimūಢātmā karta ahamiti mannate. So it is, in fact, the nature which is controlling the living entity, and the person feels that I am doing, but it is actually the nature which is acting behind. So in the same chapter, Karma Yoga, in Bhagavad Gita 3.28, again, so because the philosophical part, what we are discussing, the Tattva Mimamsa, So here again it is said that Tattvitu Mahabaho Guna Karma Vibhagayo Guna Guneshu Vartanta Iti Matva Na Sanjate. So one who is knowledge of absolute truth, O mighty armed, does not engage himself in the sense and sense gratification, knowing well the difference between work in devotion and work for a fruity result. So if somebody is, if you are working in a mode of fruity result, then whatever you do, it cannot be, and it can be a, relativism, it can be relative ethically it may be correct, but it is not in perfect platform. It cannot be absolute ethical. So to become absolute ethical or free from because ethical rules, even if it is subjected to you, if you may be judged as a ethical or non-ethical, but if you are in a devotional mood and if you are serving in the Krishna consciousness or the God consciousness, then whatever you do, the rules of the ethical rules are transcendented in that case. So this is what is explained here, that if you work in the mood of devotional devotion, then the all effects of the karma or the ethical rules also, that is obviated. And in the next sloka, 3.29, Krishna says that Prakriti guna sammudha sajjante guna karmasu tana krit sanam vido mandana krit sana with na vichalayet. He said that bewildered by the modes of material nature, the ignorant fully engage themselves in material activities and become attached. So normally, if you are not in the God consciousness, so we become attached to our fruitive activities, but the wise should not unsettle them, although these duties are inferior due to performance, lack of knowledge. So we should not be satisfied with that. We should be always trying to act in a devotional mood. So giving the purport on this, Srila Prabhupada says that those who are enlightened in spiritual life, however, should not try to agitate such material engrossed persons. So the people in the society, they are acting in different modes, and what Krishna suggests now, that a person who is enlightened, he should not agitate and try to impose much of the moral things to a person who is engaged in the material activity based on his modal level. So he says that better to prosecute one's own spiritual activity silently. So you should not disturb and agitate the other people, because every living entity is in different mode, and there is a combination of modes which is acting on him. So because of his the karma or his ambitions, he acts in different modes. So the ethical rules, whatever you may feel, may not apply to him. So here it is suggested that it is better to practice silently, so not to disturb. And such bewildered person may be engaged in such primary moral principles of life as non-violence and similar material benevolence. So like politicians and other people, they have their own moral. So if you talk to in our contemporary political system, so there are many things which are imposed on the basis of the utility part, like the religious freedom, like the reservation in the society. So there are all many ethical reasons are given for imposing them, but that all have got a shortcoming. So here Prabhupada says that men who are ignorant cannot appreciate the activities in Krishna consciousness. So that's how we see that the people who are Krishna consciousness, many people, they also raise some ethical reasons for that you are not productive. So they find it difficult to appreciate the Krishna consciousness people, and therefore Lord Krishna advises us not to disturb them and simply waste valuable time. But the devotees of the Lord are more kind than the Lord, because they understand the purpose of the Lord. So still there is a risk. So, but still the devotees take the risk, and here Prabhupada gives the purport that consequently the devotees, they undertake all kind of risk, even to the point of approaching to ignorant men to try to engage them in the acts of Krishna consciousness, which are absolutely necessary for a human being. So now I will go back again to the ethical evaluation approaches. So this is all already we have already talked about. Now I will take the first ethics of conviction, that is will or to create good for others. So this is one ethical evaluation approach given by Kant, that one should act with a will to create good for others. So I have written the Sanskrit or Hindi word for this, that one should have a Shubh Sankalp, that is, we want to good for others. But this doing good for others is always subjected, because you will create, you will think of good for others as per your mind, as per your intellect. But if you are under the Krishna consciousness, if you are in the God consciousness, then Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 9.24 that aham hi sarva yajnanam bhokta cha prabhureva cha na tu mam abhijananti tatve nat ashachananti te. So I am the only enjoyer and the master of all sacrifices. Therefore, those who do not recognize my true transcendental nature fall down. So the Kant rule of creating good for others is subjected to this falsification, that it is not the other person to whom you are thinking that you are doing the good. So for that reason, Srila Prabhupada says that Manav Seva is not Madhav Seva. So under Madhav Seva, there is a Manav Seva. So if you are doing good to please the Lord, then doing good for others is already inbuilt in that. So if you are in God consciousness, because Krishna says that aham hi sarva jnanam bhokta cha prabhurevacha. So ultimate enjoyer is me, because as we just learned that Krishna says that prakriti krimanani gunahi karmani sarvasha ahankara bhimuratma karta himiti mannate. So every living creature is working under the modes of the nature, and it is the nature which is controlling, and the nature is controlled by the Supreme Lord. And if one tries to do every activity, so whatever Shubh Sankalpa or the good he wants to create, so if he thinks that whatever good he's trying to do, can it be offered to the Lord? Because Krishna says that aham hi sarvajnanam bhokta cha prabhurevacha. So I am the enjoyer. So you try to please me. So if you please the Lord, if you do your all good activities to please the Lord, so everybody others will be benefited. So this Kant rule of will to create good for others is, you can see that if you act in this mode, in the God consciousness, so the will to create good for others is already inbuilt. So this was the one reason for that. Corroborating that aspect, Krishna again says in chapter 10.8 that aham sarvasya prabhu matta sarvam pravartate it matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvita. He says that I am the source of all spiritual and material world. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So, the person who is trying to do good for others, no, he should elevate to the level that he should try to good in the God consciousness or the Krishna consciousness, because Krishna says that the he sarvasya prabhu. So he is the prabhu of all. He is the enjoyer. So the Kant, this rule, if you follow Krishna consciousness, your rule of following the creating good for others is automatically done. Coming to the other judgment of the ethical rule, the categorical imperative, what Kant talks about, he says that whatever you do should be universally applicable. And the question is that does the general applicability creates a good for others? So for that, he says that only act according to the maxim that you can make a universal law. What Kant wants to say, that your good action will be can be judged whether it is ethical or not. That if you are doing something, if you are imposing something, that you are telling that this is what I'm doing ethical, so you must ask a question that can this rule be universalized? Can it be for everybody else? So then if you feel that whatever you are feeling good for you, is it good for him also? So, or everybody? So if it cannot be subjected to the universal law, then you are not ethically correct. You are not ethically good. So, but for this, for universal law, there cannot be in this material world. It is all relative. It is all relative. So that is how, I mean, even Krishna also says that it is relative. So even he says that samo aham sarva bhuteshu na me dvesho asti na priyah ye bhajanti tu mam bhaktya mai te teshu chapyaham. So he said that I envy no one. So although I do not envy with others, nor I am partial to anyone, I am equal to all, but whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I am also friend to him. So Krishna himself also says that there cannot be a universal law. So Krishna as a supreme personality, although he says that he is not partial to anyone, but he says that whomsoever renders service unto me in devotion, he is dear to him. So there is no universal law. There cannot be any universal law. So this categorical imperative or the in Hindi, we say that nirnayatmak roop se anivarya. So this is categorically it is imperative that one should act so that you can make it a universal law. But if we see even from the transcendental domain to material domain also, Krishna says that there cannot be universal law. There cannot be universal law. In this material world, there is nothing absolute. So, and even Krishna also has an exchange depending on the devotional attitude and aptitude of the living entity. So, these are all only that remains on the philosophical level only, that you act according to the maxim that you can make a universal law. This is again corroborated by Krishna, that he says that samam sarveshu bhuteshu tishtantam parmeshwaram vinasasya vinashyastam yah pashyanti sa pashyati. So one who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, actually sees. So Krishna is everywhere. The Supreme Personality is everywhere. So if you want to universalize the things, so if you act in a pleasing the Lord, so if you feel that the Supreme Personality or the Supreme Person is sitting in everybody's heart, then there can be a reason that you can universalize the law. So because you see the Lord everywhere, you see the Lord everywhere. So this is one aspect I was just trying to interpret from the Bhagavad Gita. Then the other categorical imperative given by Kant is that is it what one would want for themselves? So if you are doing something which you say is ethical, do you want it for yourself also? So that again is only act on the according to the maxim that you can make a universal law. So, but universal law, as I told, no, there cannot be, unless until you are in a pure Krishna consciousness, no, you cannot have a universal law. And here again in chapter 3.27, Krishna says that Prakrite krimanani gudai karmani sarvashah ahankara bimul atma kaharta ahamiti mannate. So spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, think himself as the doer of the activities that are actually carried out by the three modes of the material nature. So, so whatever you want to maxim you impose and try to make it a universal law, but every living entity is in a different mode of material nature. So there is a interaction of material mode of nature, and you don't know that at what conscious level you are deciding the moral ethical values, which whether can be made a universal law or not. So this and then again Krishna says that mama vanshe jivaloke jiva bhote sanatana mana kashtani indriyani prakritisthani karshati. So all the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So everybody has got his own platform, acting in the acting and struggling with the mind and senses. So the concept of a universal law is very difficult to follow. So the only thing is that if you are in Krishna consciousness, if you want to please Krishna, then you can universalize the thing. Now, coming to the other rule of the Kant, he says that you should do the action, we should have the positive effect on others. So that is called as a practical imperative. So act in the way that you use humanity both in your person and in the person of each other at any time, not just as a means, but also as a purpose. So whatever you do should do with a purpose or the end goal of doing good for the others. So and that should lead positive effect on others. But if you're in Krishna consciousness, then Krishna says that matta parataram nanyat kinchid asti dhananjaya mai sarvamidam proktam sutre manigana iva. So he says that matta parataram nanyat. So nothing is beyond me. So everything is within me. So if you want positive effects on others, if you are in Krishna consciousness, then you can create things and you can always improve to create a positive effect on others, leading to a much ethical reasons for you. And then Krishna in 18.54 says that Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na sochati na kankshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. So if you are in Krishna consciousness, then you are one who is transcendentally situated, at once realizes that Supreme Brahma and realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. So you are not bothered about the ethical rules you want to impose on yourself. If you are in transcendentally situated, then you are transcending the ethical rules also. You become joyful. He never laments on or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed towards everything, every living entity. In that state, he attains the pure devotional service unto me. So there is okay. I will just wrap it up very quickly. But in fact, I wanted to show one video of Srila Prabhupada. I don't know if I will be able to share it or not. But that's a very good talk with two lawyers Prabhupada is having in Melbourne. I think that what is good. So he says that if one is not God conscious, no, he cannot do good because he do not know good. If he is not in know God, if he is not God conscious, he cannot do good. So it is just out of the rule of the goodness. Okay, I will just wrap it up. The Kant, in his publicity rules, now, as he said, that all actions related to the right or of the people whose maxim is not compatible with the publicity. So that which cannot be disclosed to others cannot be ethical. Whatever good you are trying to do, if it cannot be disclosed, cannot be ethical. That is one rule. And now there is a concept of ethics of responsibility, that you want to do it good. If the end result is ultimately good, then it is good. So that is the ethics of responsibility. So I have tried to just interpret it with its two shlokas from Bhagavad Gita. So I will skip it again. And then this utilitarianism, that is upyogitavad. So this democratic principles, most of the democratic principles that follow this principle of utility, and this is much of the school of the Western philosophy. They have deliberated much on utility theory, but again, things cannot be generalized. So in Bhagavad Gita also, Krishna says, Chaturya Varnam Maya Srishtam Guna Karma Vibhagashah. So there are divisions, and the rules cannot be universal. They had to be characterized. That has to be according to the situation and things. And the whole Bhagavad Gita, I mean, the rules, that has to be interpreted in the ultimate God conscious, at the God conscious level. So the moral ethics, the moral economics, this is a very new concept of ethical reasoning, moral economics. And under this, the philosopher, they have proposed that why not to incentivize the moral? If somebody is acting moral, why don't the society incentivize them to motivate people to be moral? So, but for a Krishna conscious person, there is no incentive required. So it's an incentive-less moral principle if one becomes a Krishna conscious. And then criteria of justice, न्याय तो होना ही चाहिए. So there are principles, न्याय तो होना चाहिए, but you can't have a principle of justice as it is in the society. No, even Krishna also says that for the transcendental activity also, Krishna in 9.32 says that माम ही पार्थ व्यपाश्रित्य ये अपि स्यो पाप योनयः स्त्रियो वैश्या तथा शूद्राते अपि yanti param gatim. So he says that even the transcendental activities, Krishna, Arjun, for you it is it's very favorable, and it is favorable even for the people who like Vaishyas, Shudras, and for the Striyas or the women folk, it is also available. So it means that there is a differentiation. So So the justice also is differentiated. So it has to be, it cannot be absolute in the material world. So all these ethical reasons, they are subjected to one or the other. So in the conclusion, I just want to wrap it up in Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 2nd chapter of 1st canto. Sud Goswami, I think, says that Atah Pumbhi Dvijashreshta Varnashram Vibhagashah Swanustisthasya Dharmasya Sansiddhi Haritoshanam. So, best among the twice born, it is therefore concluded that highest perfection one can achieve by discharging the duties prescribed for one's own occupation according to the caste division and orders of life is to please the personality of Godhead. So if any person is acting to please the Lord, then he is in the perfect moral, and he is rather following the perfect ethical and moral reasons. So he does not have to worry about what moral or ethical principle is he is following. If he is God consciousness, then everything is followed. So Sansiddhi Haritoshanam. So this is what I want to conclude. So with this, I will end. And any question is there? Prabhuji, you can read for me.
Yeah, if somebody has any question, they can put it in the chat box.
Sir, it is a very deep philosophical talks actually. I think, मतलब कि, but it was very wonderful to get the gist of it. Particularly the last 3 slides was really very. I find it very informative, and I think if whenever one is doable to do that thing in the life, I think it is really great for him.
Yes, that is, of course, if that is the ultimate achievement, no, one can strive for that. One should become a God-conscious person. So that should be the aim of the life. If you are done with it, then one has not to na sochati na kamchati. So for anything.
It was a very wonderful. मतलब कि, though it was very difficult to comprehend, but still I think if we are able to comprehend even 10 or 15% of it, it would be wonderful for everyone, because it is not so easy to get unless and until you have the good base with you.
It's a easy topic for the philosophical student of philosophy. For us, normally, we don't have the background, so even I myself do not have much understanding. I was just looking after these principles. I was reading somewhere, so I thought that these great philosophers, whatever they come up with, so much of writing, it is in fact, I mean, a peanut in front of the Bhagavad Gita and our tradition of this thing. It contains everything. So you can go on creating literature based on Bhagavad Gita. If you take any tenet, you can expand it and you can write books. So, I mean, it's all finalized. It's all done when you are a student of Bhagavad Gita and a devotee. Then all philosophy is done. So there is no, in fact, it is just a curiosity that what the mainstream people are studying, what mainstream people are doing, and what whole academic system is doing it. It is all something, I mean, you can please your mind. So you create an economic system out of it. But Bhagavad Gita is ultimate. I mean, there is no doubt about it. That you can say it's a belief system also. So as people are in different modes, so they may not appreciate. Krishna himself says that for others it is very difficult to differentiate the devotees. But once if somebody understands, he can appreciate and he understands. Even we appreciate ourselves that having come to this Krishna consciousness, what changes you can create in yourself, and having your own worldview and your own style of life, everything gets changed. So, Prabhuji, I think
there is a question. So Sankar is asking, can you comment on a few points on the population ethics?
Population ethics. What to comment? I mean, I think if you follow the true Vedic principles, then the purpose of married life is also defined in Manu Samhita and other Dharma Shastras. So the purpose of marriage is to beget children, and if you are you can follow your principles, how to natural contraceptive methods are there to control the population. Because if you are in a Krishna consciousness mood, then the married life as enjoyment, the purpose of enjoyment is also questioned. So so that population control will be there. Otherwise, all methods, artificial method of controlling the population, I think that is not as per the ethical norms of the Vedic literature. That is my understanding. There are methods to control the population, and God has his own system of controlling the ईशावाश इदम सर्वम. So सब कुछ गॉड का है, भगवान का है, तो भगवान के प्लान में सब कुछ हम लोग के जो प्लान होते हैं, ये प्लान गॉड के प्लान को बहुत सी जगह डिसीव करने की कोशिश करते हैं. बट सो पॉपुलेशन, if you follow the in true sense, if you follow the Vedic concepts of life, way of life, then the population is not a problem. One has not to worry about the population. That is my understanding. I am not an expert on the subject. There are ethical principles for population control, and nowadays the ethical system is there, ethics in ecology, ethics for environment, and ethics on population. So I don't have much idea how those philosophers think, but Vedic tradition, there is no artificial method of contraception is not recommended.
Yeah, I think there is no more further questions. First of all, thank you very much, Vigyan Shastra, for such a comparative study. So it was enlightening. So thank you so much for taking our time and preparing all these things for us.